Hello, everyone. Welcome to DigiCap. How is the pandemic shaping our digital future? We are almost at the end of this online-only Congress. Geraldine de Bastion, my moderating colleague, and I have been here on and off in the past good 2 weeks. There's another event tomorrow. Oh, it's the second to last event tonight, actually, here on the premises of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Berlin. As always, please take part into this conversation. You have the chance to do that on Twitter under the hashtag DigiCap. We'll get your question once we're into this conversation, about 45 minutes or so, as always. In our series of interviews here, that's the format we're doing tonight. We've talked about data surveillance with Shoshana Zuboff, about the public good and the digital infrastructures with Tilman Santarius and Philipp Stab. We've also talked about policy a lot with Saskia Esken of the SPD, about the digital medical sector with Bart de Witte. On the week ago, I've had a conversation with Matthew Taylor of the RSA in London about the idea of good work in and after the pandemic. And I think that a lot of those topics actually tie into this conversation, this sort of closing conversation we're having tonight with Francesca Bria, which is called Rocketing into the Future. What opportunities does crisis policy offer for a fair and sustainable economy in the wake of COVID-19? Before I will introduce you properly to Francesca, we would like to show you a prominent welcome address, actually, for tonight's session. It is by Olaf Scholz, the Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor here in Germany. The original German version of this title, Mit Wumms in die Zukunft, Rocketing into the Future, actually goes back to him, I think. The video is going to be in German. There's translation if you need it. It's just under 4 minutes. Please stay with us. Now, Olaf Scholz.
Ladies and gentlemen, participants, Francesca Bria, Ms. de Bastion, Mr. Miller, I'm very pleased to welcome you here to another event under the Digital Capitalism Congress, which in these times almost goes without saying is happening online. In the past few months of the pandemic, we have seen that shortcomings in the digital transformation have an impact specifically on the lives of the citizens. But for example, when digital classes cannot take place for children, because they don't have enough equipment. At the same time, digitalization and digital tools, however, can enable us to master the challenges of our society. This is shown by the Corona app and also other digital tools, which made it possible for many employees to work from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, we're busy with the acute phase of the pandemic and its impacts, but it is still now the time to set the course for digital transformation. Digitization, for me, does not mean to do everything differently, because social partnerships and labor rights and equal opportunities and the protection of privacy are also in Corona times the central pillars of our society and economy. It is about using technological innovations to do things better. We want the digital transformation and shape it into a progressive system and foster the development in our country. And this is why in our stimulus package we have 2 billion euros that we want to earmark for artificial intelligence and digital transformation. Also the Corona virus program of the EU, which provides 750 billion euros. It has the digitization as its core. So I would like to give you 3 bullet points for the future. If we don't want to become independent from companies in China or the Silicon Valley, then we need to do everything that we can that's in Germany and also in Europe. Bigger and also smaller companies are at top quality level, and this is why we need industrial policy initiatives in Germany and in Europe, and promote the development of high-tech companies and take a more active role in setting standards. Secondly, we need to interfere when digital companies they want to exploit their dominating positions, or when we see monopolization happening on digital platforms. Only only if we have strict and clear rules in a datafied economy we can guarantee fair competition. And these rules need to set clear limits as well, so that the data sovereignty of the citizens can be strengthened. My third point, Germany also in the digital transformation needs to remain an attractive country, and digital business models and data-based value chains are changing almost all economic sectors. We need the appropriate framework conditions so that our companies, especially the SMEs, can prove their worth in a new economic system so that prosperity and wealth will remain here. In the upcoming interview with Francesca Bria, so we're going to talk about these connections as well. So last year, during the Republica event, I had the opportunity to talk to Francesca Bria about a progressive economic and social system in digital transformation, and I fondly remember this conversation, and I wish you all the success for your conference and a lot of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olaf Scholz. What is to be done in the wake of COVID-19 to secure a sustainable economy for small and medium players too? As the Minister of Finance said, that is one of the points today's guest will explore on. Francesca Bria is a recurring guest at DigiCap. I think she's here for the third time, actually. Her expertise on all things digital and beyond is vast, and it is almost impossible to cite all of her credentials. Plus, we want to get going here. We're going to let her do most of the talking. Nowadays, Francesca is president of the Italian Innovation Fund. We will talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. She's also honorary professor of technology and innovation policy at University College in London. She's part of many working groups and advisory boards on a national as well as an international and European level. I'm sure a good part of our viewers and hopefully commentators in a minute know her work as representative and coordinator of the Decode project, an experimental project for regaining control of our data. In the city of Barcelona, she put some of that knowledge and technology into practice when citizens got to vote on housing and transport on municipal platforms, among other things. And her critique of the concept of the smart city and how this ties in with larger scale problems of economic recovery will also play a role in this conversation to come. And I'm looking very much forward to this. Welcome to DigiCap, Francesca. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, it's great to be with you, even if in a digital version this time.
Yeah, I'll hope we can repeat that in a physical way one of these days. Francesca, the National Innovation Fund, I was already pointing toward that a little bit in my introduction, which you preside, primarily invests in equity. We talked about that. It seeks to help startups and SMEs, small and medium enterprises, that are vital to Italy in so-called strategic industries. And I quote here a little bit to give people a sense of what strategic industries mean, and in Italian context here. Deep tech, AI, blockchain, new materials, space, healthcare, eco-industries, agri-tech, mobility, fintech, and design, as long as it's made in Italy. Some of those funds address early business stages. Other funds actually address the Mezzogiorno, the southern part of Italy. Yet another fund actually addresses more the mature phases of startup. I think it's called the late stage fund. Now, in this crisis we're in, do you see a shift in priorities there? Would you rather increase work with an already powerful and very promising company, or on the contrary, help out the small and sort of weaker firms at the moment? Is there a shift actually going on because of this crisis? What would you think?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think that the big challenge that we're facing is that not only we have to face this huge healthcare, economic and social crisis, but we also have to give a direction to a future of Europe and Italy that we want, of course, greener, more just and more digital. And so we have to put forward systemic and radical initiatives, because we cannot do anymore We cannot keep the status quo. We have to change. We have to look into the future and what we want to do different. And I think the Italian Innovation Fund in the Italian context is a new systemic initiative. It's a public and private venture capital fund to really boost the innovation ecosystem in a new way, because not only we invest in startups and scale-ups, but we also invest in the entire industrial ecosystem of Italy. So we strengthen the link between science and industry, which you do very well in Germany, but that is the engine of innovation. We work with universities, with research centers. We are boosting 20 next generation accelerators and technology transfer hubs. And also, I think for your question of we should invest in the small companies or the big companies, I think we definitely want to leverage the big industries, Italian industries in key strategic sectors that they are mostly public but also private, to invest in the innovation that are coming out of our startups and our research centers. And maybe this can be the new exit for Italian startups, so that these big companies can then really scale the innovation into the market, but also direct it to what Italy really needs. And you made the example of making sure that this innovation, it's not creating new divides. And one of these divides is a territorial divide between north and south. And that's why we're investing a lot in the south of Italy, which has a lot of potential and talent, in particular in the green transition, in the energy transition, lots of also in biotech. So we have a lot of talent, and we can, we have to basically show that innovation doesn't create new inequalities, but it can be really put at the service of people, at the service of the ecological transition, and also bridge the divide, which are digital divide, but also social and economic and territorial divides. So I think this is a big challenge.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to stay actually a little bit to talk just one more question about the divide between the north and the south, just to get a more concrete picture of what's going on in Italy at the moment. You know, we get some news, but we don't get all of the news. So northern Italy, of course, being one of the economic strongholds of the Italian country, has been hit much harder, at least in spring, by COVID-19, right? Especially in spring. Will this help the traditionally weaker regions, actually, in the south, in Sicily, somewhat to get better through this crisis? Is this actually something they benefit from now economically, or would this be too soon to call?
No, I think we want to have social cohesion. I think if the south of Italy is strong, also the north of Italy is strong, and vice versa. So at the moment, I think also the COVID crisis is spread out in a kind of even situation. I mean, we're actually adopting a strategy in Italy that it's more, let's say, targeted to closing specific zones. We have all this risk level analysis. So some zones are red and people cannot move. We have restrictions according to the level of the spreading of the virus. So it's a bit more granular, the way we are locking down, also not to affect the economy so much. But I think, we need a strong economy overall. So actually we have a new ministry, is the Ministry of the South and Social Cohesion. We do a lot of work also with the Innovation Fund with them. But the idea is really that the south of Italy can become a laboratory for ecological and democratic innovation, where we can have exactly, for example, lots of strength in the ecological and energy transition, also because we produce lots of renewable energy. We have aerospace facilities, which are excellent. Agri-tech, of course, which is a big asset for Italy. So we have a lot of capacity there. So we're trying to really link a better north and south, but also big cities with internal and rural areas, what we call the internal spine of Italy, which of course moves through the Apennine into the north. And I think now also because of the COVID, we see that due to connectivity, which is spread throughout Italy, many people are not living in the city anymore, but moving a bit out of the city. And we are rethinking, let's say, a smart city strategy that's more decentralized. So we connect the real countryside with the metropolitan areas in a totally new way. And I think, obviously, also coming back to your question before, I think one big shift that we're seeing now is that with the crisis, digitalization has increased a lot. So we understand today, also from a policy standpoint, that connectivity and data are critical infrastructures on top of which essential services depend upon, like healthcare, like education, like labor. So they are essential facilities of our time. And this is good because it helps us to put a lot of emphasis in accelerating this digital transition. But at the same time, we are realizing how much we are dependent on foreign provision of platforms that are not owned by any European company, but they are in the hands of US or Chinese players, for example. And we see an extreme concentration of power in the digital space. So this is also why I think initiatives like the Italian Innovation Fund, which also, can be in synergy with national promotion institutions in Europe, with our development banks. For instance, in Germany, you have KfW, in France, BPI, in Italy, we have CDP. These institutions now are working together to boost also more funding and more financing to grow a robust innovation ecosystem in Europe, which is a response to this concentration of power, but also that says that Europe wants to get back in the game. Like, we need to build a solid and resilient digital industry. So building software, building hardware, building platforms, and of course, managing data flows and AI in order to provide the essential services of the future. And in order also to support this ambition that we have to become greener and to become more social cohesive, so more just as a continent. So I think that this is something that we have to take in consideration as well.
I'm sure we are going to get a little bit deeper into questions of geopolitical strategies later in our conversation. That was a very promising start right there. But I'd like to ask you just a really quick question. It might be marginal, but I thought it really interesting that you said that a lot of people were actually leaving the city. Is it because they want to reconnect with their family who are on the countryside? Because I've seen that happening in Germany, actually. This is sort of a private observation now. I've seen this happening in my bubble, so to speak, that many young people are returning to their families that are not necessarily living in the city and so forth. Is this what you mean, actually? Is that why people are leaving the city?
This is one thing, but obviously the other issue is that we cannot have density at the moment. We need to respect social distancing, and also lots of things are closed, like restaurants, like touristic businesses, like cultural activities and so on, and also because we have smart working. So people are working remotely, they're working from home, so they don't need to be in the city. And actually we are managing public transportation systems so that we restrict how you can use public transportation system. And so that's why many people are moving away from the city centers, and they prefer sometimes to work from remote areas. And also, we have all these borghi in Italy, which are the medieval centers, places in the south, which are kind of paradise. Many people left to go to the main city centers. But this is an urban trend that we are observing for a long time. So I think this is also part of the ecological shift that I think we're going to be seeing, so guided by cities, but also that will involve not only smart cities, but also smart countrysides. So we're going to have to bridge the divide between the city and the internal areas and rural areas.
We lost you there with the moving picture a little bit. The audio was fine. I could understand everything you said, Francesca, but the picture is kind of slow and it's still going. Can you hear me fine, Francesca? Is the audio connection fine?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, we'll just continue.
Yes.
It's not really synchronous with the picture right now, but we'll continue with the audio, I guess, in this case. Let us talk about, stimulus packages and the post-pandemic outlook. Olaf Scholz mentioned that too, about economic recovery post-COVID-19 on a European level. How stimulus plans lead to meaningful transformation when it comes to economic resilience and sustainability, which is one of the main topics tonight, right? First, we had this 750 billion economic stimulus plan by the EU, 500 of which I think is in grants, plus the national recovery plans, of course. That was in early summer. Now in November, we've just seen an even larger plan, the largest plan ever in the EU here, and I'd like to quote what it actually consists of. It says the the European Union's long-term budget, coupled with the Next Generation EU initiative, which is a temporary instrument designed to boost the recovery, will be the largest stimulus package ever financed through the European Union budget. A total of 1.8 trillion will help rebuild a post-COVID-19 Europe. It will be a greener, more digital, and more resilient Europe. That's all what we're hoping for, right? Unquote, of course. Can you give us your take, actually, on where that kind of money is but a quick fix, maybe, and where you see investments in future resilience and sustainability that are prone to work, that are likely to be successful in the future? Can you give us an outlook on that, Francesca?
Yes, I hope you solved the image, but I see maybe not. I mean, I go on. Yes? Please
go on just with the audio. We don't know what to do with the image right now. The image is from before, but the audio is fine. So.
Okay. So, well, I actually see that we have in Europe a pretty historical and possibly structural change with these programs. I think, first of all, we were not only rescuing the economy, as I said also at the very beginning, but able to create a post-pandemic direction for the economy that is consistent with our vision to have a greener recovery. And I think this could be a major turning point, because beyond the stimulus program that you mentioned, which is maybe the liquidity or the credit program for SMEs, for example, supported throughout Europe, or the SURE program, which I think it's, the labor allowance scheme with over 100 billion as social bonds, which I think is a pretty innovative and also very helpful program. I think the big deal is that we have a Next Generation EU, the 750 billion with 390 billion in grants, which is really funded as EU sovereign debt. I mean, this is the first time that this happens. This means that the EU is having a fiscal capacity. So we're going to fund it with Euro bonds. We have a fiscal capacity never had before. And so we have this capacity that is well designed and well targeted with a vision for the future. I find this very important and historical. And of course, this will mean that we will have to repay back this money in 7 years. And this means for us that we will have to get our own resources, our own capacity as Europeans, which means probably do some pretty radical shift as in terms of EU progressive taxation, or a carbon tax, a digital tax, or a wealth tax, the corporate minimum tax that we are discussing at OECD level, or even funding financial transaction tax. And this will give the capacity to Europe, like its own fiscal capacity, to then fund our program, like the Green Deal, and modernize our economy, invest in healthcare, invest in education. So I think this is transformative. And that's what we have to basically execute when it comes to the member states together as Europe. If we are not together, we are not going to win the 21st century struggle here, which is also about taking back our sovereignty, which is, of course, a technological sovereignty that means also a political and an economic sovereignty. But I also want to say that when it comes to the digital transition, which, of course, I look very much into detail, I think that also there, the EU is setting out a very ambitious vision with political willingness that we have to recognize, because we have a new toolbox that on one side has a regulatory framework that maybe we're going to discuss later, with some pillars which I think can shift the global digital economy as we know it. Then we have an ambitious common financing. We have trade and competition rules that are going to have to be shifted. And then we have an industrial strategy, which I think with industrial strategic projects and alliances, which I think it's the real missing part. Because I've been saying it also in the past, that for me it is clear, also given the new geopolitical dimension, that Europe cannot anymore be just seen as a big super regulator, as a regulatory superpower of the digital age. We need to be competing also as an economic power through our technological innovation and to our digital capacity. And so we need a pan-European fiscal policy. We do not have it now. We do not have the equivalent of the agricultural common framework for the industry. We do not have a European fiscal policy with our common financing, our strategies, our rules, and also our know-how, our organizational strategic know-how on how to do it. And so I think that this will be, how to compete in the value chain of the future and how to do it on our own terms. So how to put forward, let's say, a European digital sovereignty vision, which is a digital humanism that put, human rights and the rule of law and citizen participation, workers' rights and environmental standards at the very center, and how to do it in a competitive way so that we can keep our national sovereignty, but also our data ethics and our capacity to have our own principle and values. But how we can then, set the standards that will enable us to become leaders again in this space. I think this is the most exciting part for me, and this is what we have to show that we can actually do it.
Oh, I see. The picture is actually ahead of the audio, so the audio is behind the picture. That's something to get used to. But
this is a digital experiment.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Usually it's the other way around. But okay, let me just stick with one quick question to the fiscal stimulus. You are addressing, fiscal policies in a pan-European level, right? My impression is that many economic recovery plans actually focus on protecting jobs. Work first, simply said, right? And what this often leads to is bailing out companies without conditions on some levels, so to speak. So environmental and social conditions are often left out when that happens. How to get these topics into policies of fiscal stimulus? What is your take there? What can policy writing achieve in this respect, actually, that those factors are not left out?
No, I think this is key. I think we can't just bail companies out. It's part, actually, of giving a direction to the future economy, that you have conditionalities that are linked, for example, to decarbonization of industry and CO2 emissions cap. I think this is what President Macron is doing also with the automotive industry. I think we can have conditionalities linked to pay taxes in Europe, so that companies that put their money into tax havens cannot receive the bailouts. And we can also have conditionalities linked to minimum wage and worker standards. So I think that these conditionalities help us not only to bail them out, but to transform them. So to transform the business towards the more sustainable direction. So definitely this is the case. In my remark before, I was also referring to the strong need of having a new digital taxation system at a European level. When we talk about large companies that pay taxes, large digital platforms should pay taxes where they have users and where they make profits, and without resorting to tax havens. I think this is key. Because otherwise, we are not going to have our own resources that we can reinvest in healthcare, in education, in our cities, in mobility. So we need to transform this taxation system. Now we're working at the OECD level, but the Commission has expressed commitment that if it is not working at the OECD level, before Trump presidencies has really made it difficult to advance. But anyway, Europe should do it at the European level. And many countries are going to proceed with the digital levy anyways at the national level. So I think a European dimension is absolutely critical. Of course, together with taxation, as you probably know, I also, when it comes to regulation, in particular of digital monopolies, advocate for a strong antitrust policy shift. So I don't know if you want to discuss this now, but I think this kind of things should be seen as a holistic kind of reforms if we want to move forward to really take more political control over unprecedented corporate monopoly power. I think we should be concerned as policymakers to see such industrial concentration of power, which is also a social concentration of power, which is unprecedented in history. So we have to be able to have effective policy measures to show that we can take back some democratic governance over critical infrastructures of our economy and our society.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, we can talk about digital regulatory measures actually now and skip a few questions. Now, exactly, when it comes to regulatory measures, there's something quite big in the European political pipeline, so to speak. We don't know that much about it yet. I think the first draft is going to be presented on December 2nd. I'm talking about the Digital Services Act on the European level, das Gesetz für digitale Dienste. So what we know about the draft of this act, which is going to be presented quite shortly, it is a quite radical policy, I think, in many respects, especially when we talk about interoperability, which is one of the key terms probably there. So platforms would not be able to use large data packages exclusively, for example. They would have to share some of their data with other smaller firms, maybe even as public good. We don't know. Its overall aim, though, is to strengthen what is called the single market, and not just the platform, setting up new rules for hegemonic platforms or gatekeepers. Is this a regulatory fight that can be won up against the platforms in Europe? What do you think?
Well, I think we should mention again all the package, the regulatory package. I think it's quite ambitious. Today, the Commission has presented the first one, which is the Data Governance Act. That I think is very promising, also because it goes, of course, I've analyzed the draft. They have presented it this afternoon, so it will require a bit more work from our side to see, all the little details. But it seems a real shift also in the direction that my Decode project was suggesting, that is, on one side, to create a trade-off between protecting the sovereignty of data of citizens and giving them tools to control data, to control their own data, to citizens and to businesses, to preserve their fundamental rights and values when they use data, but at the same time to enable data sharing, so to unlock the public value of data and also public interest data. And also it mentioned things like data altruism, which I think is a very nice word because, as you said, it goes beyond this idea of only infinite markets. You can also create public value with data. You can improve public services. You can have better cities. You can do a lot of more things. So it has this data altruism. It talks about data trust and the fiduciary relationship. And it talks about data co-ops, which data cooperatives, that is something we also have been experimenting in Barcelona, that gives more autonomy, so information self-determination to people to decide what data they want to keep private, what data they want to share, with whom they want to share with data, and on what term, on democratic terms. So I think it's a very good first step. Then, as you mentioned, we are going to have the Digital Service Act. And I imagine this Digital Service Act being very much, as you said, about regulating gatekeepers and this big monopoly power that they have, and possibly introducing much more ex-ante regulation, which I think is needed because we are always late in fighting these antitrust cases. So we need to be fast. We need to move faster. And I think the data sharing mandates part, so these monopoly powers, as we know, the digital economy is based, their business model is based largely on the monetization and manipulation of personal information and data. And one of the big problems when we talk about antitrust, which has been defined as the antitrust paradox, is that these companies, the platforms, the big platforms, the gatekeepers, they own the infrastructure, but they also own the data and the platform on top, and also the algorithms, which are often not transparent how they're used. And so they can discriminate against rivals, for example, giving priorities to their own business, to their own products, or to their own network of providers. And this is, of course, one big antitrust case against Amazon at the moment in the EU, which is exactly on this. In a world where data is the new currency, price mechanisms is not sufficient enough to determine when there is an antitrust case. So it is very important to link privacy, data, and competition, because these things are not separable in digital platforms. And maybe we even have to have some cryptographic experts, some security and data experts in antitrust cases. On top of that, of course, we want to regulate how this data is shared. So if there is going to be a mandate for sharing data with rivals, we're going to have to see how to do it, because it's pretty complicated, but I think it's definitely possible to do that. And then another step would be recognizing public interest data, which now it is in a French regulation where, for instance, the competition authorities have mandated that big platforms have to share what it is defined as public interest data, data which serve a public purpose. And this is also very important, because then we can use that data for education, for transportation, for improving our cities, and so on. And also in that case, of course, these are norms that are going to they're going to be lobbied against. So we're going to have to defend it as we have defended the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, that I think is the most advanced juridical framework that we have in the world, and the de facto e-privacy standard that we have globally, that really talks about collective rights to data. So I think we have to understand that Europe has a very strong legislation here that says that data is our fundamental constitutional right. And this is something very strong that we need to be able to enforce. And I think then I get to the important part, is how you enforce these regulations. I think this is very important, because we are seeing with the GDPR that sometimes the way it is enforced, it's not brilliant. There are lots of cases where people report that the GDPR has been violated, but there are very few follow-ups in legal terms. And so I think one way to enforce it is going to be to encode those rules directly in the technology. For instance, as I've done in the Decode project, using decentralized and privacy-enhancing technology with the highest cryptographic standards, give us, as people, as citizens, as users, the security that our rights can be enforced using those kind of technologies. So this is one way to enforce norms directly into the technology itself. And just to end with the packages, because there is also going to be the Digital Market Act, as you said, and then we're going to have also a Data Act. I think this is also going to be presented by the end of the year, probably on the 9th of December or later on, where there is going to be defined the question of data portability, data interoperability, IPR rights over data, and also the transparency of algorithms, which I think is another very key issue, because algorithms need to be audited. In particular, how automated decision processes are working in the public sector, but not only. We have seen biases when it comes to racial profiling, to facial recognition technologies, gender biases, socioeconomic biases, all kinds of problems, discrimination. If we do not understand, if the algorithms are not explicable, they're not clear how they're used and how they impact our right, for instance, to have a mortgage, our right to apply for a public service, our right to have basically access to our fundamental services in a digital age. So this is also going to be very important. So I invite us to look at the entire package as one holistic regulatory step forward coming from the Commission. And I think, they look pretty ambitious, and I think we're moving in the right direction. But as I said before, I think regulation is not going to be enough. Europe is going to have the courage, the political courage, to put forward a very ambitious strategy when it comes to industrial policy, and common investments to create our own digital infrastructures, our own digital industry, in particular because the challenges we're facing, and in premise climate change and the decarbonization of our industrial sector that goes with it, but also healthcare that needs to be more robust and more resilient, and then the digital, let's say, strategic autonomy in the digital space, which is our digital sovereignty in the global supremacy race that we see between US and China in who is going to control the future of artificial intelligence, next generation microprocessors and chips, quantum computing. I mean, these are disruptive technologies, 5G and so on. They are going to change all sectors in society, and they're going to determine the new global value chains. And I think that that is where, if we do not compete at a global economic level and at an industrial level, we are not also going to be able to set standards and rules. And so it's going to be a problem not only for our global competitiveness and national security and sustained, sustainable growth in the future, but also for our democracy. Because as I said before, some of those models strongly impact our fundamental basis of our society, the human rights, the rule of law, citizens' participation, and the basic standards that we have in a European society. So it has huge implications.
A lot of the acts you were referring to now, Francesca, are really very ambitious, and they go much farther than the GDPR. I think in many cases they actually attack the core of the business models of a lot of the platforms. So it'll be really interesting how this is going to play out, if this is going to be a new hot or cold war. There's definitely a hot tech war going on between the superpowers on a geostrategic level that we might talk about now to get away a little bit from regulation. As you said, and this is, technological sort of sovereignty on a EU level. Between China and the USA, tech infrastructure plays a big role, and the dependency on Chinese 5G technology we've talked about so much in the last couple of years. On one hand, the dependency of big European companies on Amazon cloud services. You were mentioning Amazon before, right? This is really crucial digital infrastructure that is going to be implemented pretty soon. The race is on there. Tempo, speed are big factors right there, not just in the Digital Services Act. Gaia X now is a classic public-private partnership of the EU and large European companies. It's also a decentralized approach, actually, to cloud structure in order to make businesses less dependent on Amazon, most of all. So what's your assessment of Gaia X? Is this pointing in the right direction on an infrastructural level?
Yes. So first, as you said, let me say that the global technology supremacy race between the US and China is creating, I think, or risks creating a global technology industry split that we're seeing, for example, in the case of 5G, but also in banning specific Chinese technology in the US, and in particular with the chips, next generation chips and microprocessors that are going to be very important for artificial intelligence and in the future edge performance computing, of course, high performance computing and quantum computing. And I think we are going to see an arms race maybe at the national level when it comes to artificial intelligence. So we are also seeing much stronger interventions of states into the economy to protect critical technologies such as biotech, such as quantum and artificial intelligence, for instance, controlling exports. And I think, and also banning, as I said before, or even sanctioning specific technologies. I mean, this is unprecedented, so it is a new geopolitical dimension. And I think on one side is, of course, for national security reasons, but also because we are seeing a very strong competition to capture the value of the current digital industrial revolution. And I think that we're going to see this decoupling between US and China moving away from only the strategic technology sector into a series of other activities in the economy and our sectors. I mean, like, batteries, electric batteries, like hydrogen, like many other things, when Europe has an ambition to complete also because of our goals of becoming climate neutral in 2050. So European leadership, let me say, it's absolutely critical. And I think if we don't want to become a colony between the big state of China on one side and the big tech model of the US and Silicon Valley on the other side, so a colony between those two, we're going to have to reclaim sovereignty over critical infrastructures. And so this includes, of course, the 5G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, microprocessors, and so on. But it also involves cloud computing. So I think that, just to stress that there are multiple challenges in the technology stack, controlling data, processors, and connectivity will be key for us for the future. And I welcome this ambition of Europe to, obviously cloud computing at the moment is in the hands of a few players, which are the GAFAM on one side and the Chinese equivalent, the BAT, on the other side. I mean, we have these concentrated economies, 5 to 7 companies that own the digital economy at this point and also own the cloud computing. If you do not control cloud computing also, you cannot set the standards for data security, data interoperability, data portability, and data sovereignty that we want to achieve with all our regulatory package, right? So I think in this cloud and data space, it is very clear that if we do not couple the regulatory effort with the industrial strategy and taking back the control of the cloud, it's going to be very hard to enforce your policy. So I think that it is good to go in the direction of having a federated, open source, interoperable, and sovereign European cloud. This is the ambition of Gaia X.
I know.
I think if we achieve that, this means we want to achieve a global standard on data interoperability and data security, like we did with the GSMA in the telecommunications sector in the past. So it can be very strong and it can be successful. But I think we have to be careful that we really do that. And we also do that to open up an ecosystem for example, startups and players which develop open source hardware, open source software technology in Europe, which have the capacity to grow on top of this ecosystem, to use data and artificial intelligence to create new services, also startups and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that I hope we do not get captured, because I see that also we are having all the hyperscales entering Gaia X, US big players, the Asian big players entering the consortium that we created, which can be fine if we if we maintain this, objective of creating this open, interoperable, and sovereign cloud, which is based on European technology and European intellectual property rights that we fund through our research and innovation program. Because Europe is one of these continents which have this research and innovation program, like Horizon 2020, like Digital Europe now, like the Recovery Facility. We're going to put 140 billion euros into digital now. So we have an unprecedented financial investment, which is going to be leveraged by more financial instruments to do that. And so we have to be building on top of the technologies that we are having in Europe, and we have to be able to protect it as well. And that's the challenge that I see.
You mentioned research and innovation as a key term here, R&I, as it is often referred to in public papers. One of the levels that can be implemented or trying to achieve in terms of more sovereignty, more digital sovereignty, is, of course, the city. And now it gets a little ambivalent, as probably people who know you know now, because in an essay you co-authored with Yevgeny Morozov in early 2018, I think, it was a critique of the smart city, or call for a smarter city, or for a really smart city, so to speak. This includes municipal ownership of data, energy, finances, mobility, medical, etc. The hardest thing, as you two pointed out in this paper, is to change these policy bottom up in the city, since, I quote now, the political and the economic models on which most of our cities function are not determined locally, but rather nationally and globally. Quote end. Now, however, your work in Barcelona did change some things on a local level, so to speak. I was referring to that in the intro a little bit, when citizens got to vote on really crucial issues on municipal platforms. I'm also thinking about certain municipal reactions to Uber or Airbnb, what Airbnb had to face in Berlin, for example. Berlin is not very much in the forefront of those subjects, but it had a justified reaction, I think, towards Airbnb. But now, drawing from your recent advisory work for a new think tank in Hamburg, it's called the New Institute. What are examples where cities can take action on their own, actually, from the ground up, and do not have to be interlocked from the beginning with national or even international initiatives or programs? Can you give us a little bit of insight to your work in Hamburg there?
Yes. Thanks for the question. So I think, first of all, let me just say that I think it's very important to link what we just talked about with the question of bottom-up power and citizens' power and the capacity of cities from the ground up to build this model for digital democracy, for a big democracy, as I called it, as an alternative to the big state, the big tech, as a European model that can be experimented and scaled in cities. So I think that if we think that in relation also with what's happening at the European level, what's happening at the national level, of course, this has more power because it shows that all the experiments that cities are running, cities are at the forefront, on one side on the kind of sustainable democratic use of technology, on data sovereignty, on citizens' participation, but they're also at the forefront of net zero strategy and the ecological transition. If you look at the most exciting examples in the world, but also in Europe now, on how to achieve decarbonization and how to transition to a net zero society, these are happening in cities, like taking away cars from the city centers, creating green spaces, giving back public spaces to citizens, tripling the number of bicycle lanes all around, electrifying mobility, moving towards a connected and sustainable mobility, fighting climate change with concrete measures. And all of these require smart infrastructure and data. And this data should be in a democratic control. So this data really in cities should be experimented and seen as a public infrastructure, as electricity, as the water, as the air we breathe, because it is a meta utility that is absolutely essential to take better decisions, to measure the impact of our policies, and to create innovative services with value which stays locally, of course, and can also compete because data is also seen as a regulation, for instance, when you have to regulate Airbnb or Uber or the big platforms. So I think that the big challenge there is, well, first of all, the critique to the smart city, very simply said, is that the smart city is not about building a top-down, tech-first city. It is not about getting Google or Huawei to come to your city and start selling you gadgets and technologies and telling you what to do. It is about people first, and it is about setting your policies, which are your priorities, involving citizens and giving them more power, for instance, on affordable housing, on sustainable mobility, on public health care, on fighting climate change, on citizens' participation. And only after it is about using this data connectivity and platforms governed in a democratic way to achieve those goals. And then in Hamburg, because Hamburg is a very fascinating place, I mean, it's a city where there is a lot of talent, there is a good track record in terms of transparency policy, citizen participation, and also super advanced when it comes to data. we are trying to experiment a model of democracy, data sovereignty, and net zero strategy, because I think this is what we want to bridge now, is to really put technology at the service of people, but also at the service of the ecological transition. Because we need, for example, a live map of CO2 emission. We need to see how much energy we are consuming in public buildings and shift to renewable energy systems with decentralized electrical grids. We need to see how, we want to share data about energy consumptions, for instance. So there are a lot of ecological and green transformation that needs a very smart approach to data, but also this radical democratization of data that is really treated as a common good, as a public infrastructure, and can foster more innovation and more partnerships. So now we are bringing all the knowledge that, I had when I was the CTO of Barcelona, but also an advisor to the UN, to smart cities. So I helped them to shape a global program and so on, working with a lot of other cities around, and try to make Hamburg a kind of capital for this sustainable digitization that Europe badly needs. And I think it looks very exciting at the moment.
Thank you, Francesca. I think one of the misconceptions probably of just the term smart cities might have been that people associate it automatically with cheaper and faster tech, right? So that this is probably just a tool to actually achieve more bottom-up democracy. I think this misconception is slowly falling apart, actually. That's what
it's about shaping the future. It's about shaping the future of the city.
Yeah.
It's not about tech first, and it's not about the technology solutionism. Technological solutionism is the paradigm of our times. So if you want to solve a problem, just click here, build an app. This is a mindset. We have to move away that mindset. And it is also really about building a smart bureaucracy. And this is something we should not underestimate, changing the culture, the mindset, creating digital capabilities about policy making in the public sector, and then work together with the private sector, the startups, the social cooperatives, workers, and so on, all the initiatives out there to make this a reality. And believe me, the green transition and the digital transition will happen in cities. So the standards and the power, the financing and the policy and the regulation should happen at the European level and at the national level, but the experimentation, the radical experimentation that we need to make this real, to transform our policies into real action and real projects that benefit citizens in their daily life, it's going to happen in cities. So we need a network of progressive cities that put people participation, digital democracy, and the ecological transition at the very core.
Thank you, Francesca. We're already running out a little of time, but we can go on for a little bit. I have one question on Twitter and one closing question for you, actually. Matthias Kuhlmann on Twitter, he writes, Francesca, the European Union budget comprises just 1% of gross national income of member states. What about the rest of 99%? How to get the Green Deal for the rest, he writes.
Yeah, well, I think that as I already answered to this in a sense, because I talk about the recovery facility. The recovery facility is the new fiscal capacity of Europe. So I think that what we need to do is to use that. It's a lot of investment. It's really massive. We have never seen all this investment, not only for the corona recovery, but also going into the future, which should be more just, more digital and greener, and get member states to execute those projects. I think this is a huge challenge, because this also, we have to face with 30 years of neoliberal policies that actually externalize capacity in the public sector, outsource a lot of capabilities, made us think that the state is not an innovator and doesn't have a role in innovating the economy. So I think we also have to shift that and create capacity, execute those projects, and transform Europe. And I also want to say something about we need to be innovative also organizationally, not only with financing, because the financing is one part, but to make it real, maybe we're going to need, I don't know, a pan-European data company, for instance, for the public interest. We're going to create new institutions and new organizations that help us to really achieve those goals. I think this is something where we need more imagination.
Okay, thank you. Now, Francesca, we started out this conference 2 weeks ago, just shortly after the U.S. Election. And this is a kind of a subjective question now. In the midst of fears of extreme public polarization, we face not only in the U.S., of course, but in the EU as well. Sometimes we forgot about that when all we did was watching CNN, probably. But there seems to be now, on many of the subjects you've covered, to me, somehow of a new common ground when it comes to jobs, sustainability, green deals, digital sovereignty. There seems to be a lot of common ground, at least in some states of the EU. For example, what Ursula von der Leyen, conservative politician here in Germany, is trying to advocate on the European Commission in terms of platform policy we've talked about, all those, Digital Services Act, may have come as a surprise to many just 5 years ago. If you told them Ursula von der Leyen is going to advocate exactly this, what you have discussed in your communities for so long, nobody would have believed you probably, right? Just a couple of years ago, maybe. Yeah. So this is actually progress. This is going somewhere, and it's hard to say on which side of the party lines this is actually unfolding at the moment. I think this is quite exciting about these processes we've talked about. So do you see that too, a somewhat unforeseen common goal across party lines in the EU, and where do you think this will actually end, this common ground?
No, I see it, and I think I said it throughout my speech. I see an historical opportunity here, but I also think that we need to really now mobilize our energy, our capacity to create new alliances, for example, between the youth movement that is protesting against climate change and because government don't do enough to decarbonize the economy and to stop this climate emergency. The workers' condition, for instance, in platform economy, which is terrible, sometimes it's like slavery. We have to get, new working rights. We have to get a new deal, really, which is this green digital, but it's a new social contract for this society. So we need progressive political parties, we need progressive policy, we need social movements and cities. So we do need to forge these alliances that will make sure that this does not end. It is not just, this recovery phase and then we go back to normal, we go back to the status quo. We have to make this a sustained movement. We can only do it through a political action. So I think it's our duty to be practical and pragmatic because we want to deliver on these objectives. And I think now we do have the historical opportunity. So let's create capabilities. Let's make sure that it's just. So it is not about discriminating people. We said it at the very beginning, north-south divide, divide between cities, divide between workers and socioeconomic and ethnical divides and so on. But at the same time, let's build the political coalitions and political power that enable us to transform it into a sustainable shift.
Thank you so much, Francesca Bria, for having been with us in the last hour. Hope to see you one of those times when the next Congress is in Berlin in person. I wish you all the best for the next half year or so. Thank you for being with us. Bye-bye from Berlin.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.